To everyone watching and listening, we offer our warmest welcome to this session entitled The Corona Effect on Online Education. My name is Ingi Einarsson and I'm the General Manager of the Icelandic RHnet called RHnet. As we all know and have even felt, the effect of the coronavirus has been transformative in many sectors, with education as a good example, where most of the teaching and learning has moved from the classroom to be online. This has, of course, influenced traffic patterns and increased dramatically the demand on media services through online group meetings and teaching, recordings of sessions, and post-processing. This complete shift was not foreseen, as we all know, and also as Stefan Hittfors explained very nicely in the plenary session. To cope with this disruptive effects of the pandemic, swift decisions and actions had to be taken in an attempt to uphold services in as good manner as possible. So in a way, many of us have had an involuntary crash course in a form of a disaster management. Looking back at the last 8 months, I think we can underline the word management, because we collectively put an extra effort, and in some key areas, a relatively few were willing and able to put in the extra effort necessary to keep everything going. To give us a glimpse into these changes and even possible long-term effects, the media manager at NORDUnet, Erik Kikkenborg, and Hans Hüttel, the assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science at Aalborg University, will present their view. And we will start by Erik. Erik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. I will share a presentation. And as you all heard this morning, that this pandemic came and took us a little bit by surprise. And I will give you a quick overview of what happened with the usage of the services that we provide for the 5 Nordic countries. And actually what the power of being united means, so we could actually very fast change the environment, so we could facilitate all the new digital strategies. I did spend the first from March till the summer holiday. I talked to universities about digital strategies and how to cope with the new situation. Oops. Let me go one back. So what you can see here is the first bulb on this setup is the actual lockdown that we in most of the Nordic countries saw in March and April, and we were peaking about this is from Zoom. As I show you later, all the other services look more or less the same. That we were peaking around 100,000 concurrent meeting participants a day in our setup, and we had to really gear up really fast. We got Zoom involved to help us set up a cluster in AWS to make sure that we could facilitate all the students needing this. Then we went into summer holiday, and as you can see, that it went down a little bit, and we started gearing up on our on-prem and installing servers, and spent a lot of time during the summer, and everybody was working really hard. And we thought, okay, we will come up and we might peak about the same thing as we did there in March, April month. But that took us a little bit by surprise, and everybody has then implemented the digital strategies that they have been talking about in the first couple of months. And the result is that we are now peaking at 180,000 concurrent Zoom users a day. So that's quite extensive. Also, we see the same thing with the meeting minutes and the number of meetings that are held every day. that we thought that we were at a good point during the lockdown, but we can see that everything increases over time. Also for Kaltura, this is the same pattern month by month. This is video played out on the platform. And we can see there in September, October, it actually took off really, really fast when people came back from holidays. The same thing on Panopto. As you can see from, you can't even see the statistics that we have from January 19. There was actually people using the platform, but it grew so fast, so we actually can't see them on the statistics anymore. This all resulted in a huge growth on our services. So we had 85 institutions on Kaltura or in Zoom on the beginning, and we grew with 100 institutions. So that was a factor of 2. Also assigned licenses, of course, then grew the same. But especially the concurrency of people using the platform. That was really, really what took us by surprise, because they use all CPU resources on our backend. So we grew a factor of 39. So imagine all the people running around installing servers. They are working day and night. And you see the same thing on the meeting minutes. So on Kaltura, we saw a factor growth of 4.5. And Panopto, as I showed you, was a factor of 15. So this has led to a whole new, the organization and the media services from NORDUnet is now rapidly changing day by day, and we have to face this new services as a critical infrastructure. And I'm only running the services and trying to make sure that they work. And so the really important thing is actually that what Hans is going to tell us about, because he's the one that actually suffers what we're doing here at NORDUnet. So I will go back.
Thank you, Erik. And then now to our second speaker, Associate Professor at Aalborg University, Hans Hüttel. Floor is yours, Hans.
Thank you, Jon. What I'd like to do now is to share with you some of the findings that I've had and some of the experiences I've had. As you probably know, I should know that things changed on March the 11th, and it completely took us by surprise. And I never went back to, I'd been to a conference in Malta, and I came back from that conference and I never returned to my office. I never got sent home. I was home already. All the teaching activities that we did were supposed to be carried out online, and it continued all through the semester. And now, even though it's autumn, online teaching is still a fact of life for some of us. I've been to my office once this semester. How do we react to this? Well, that's all the anecdotal evidence, but I actually thought of carrying out a survey together with a colleague from the Department of Culture and Learning, Dorina Knauer. And we carried out that survey in mid-May. We distributed that survey to all members of teaching staff at AAU, and we got 799 responses, which was quite good. And well, when we actually set out to do this survey, we were a bit prejudiced because Dorina and I had carried out teacher training, and we worked on planning and teaching, and we expected that many members of the teaching staff would be very reluctant to use online teaching, but now everyone was forced to do that. And how would that change, affect attitudes toward online teaching among the teaching staff of Aalborg University? Our hypothesis was that senior members of staff, and we were senior members ourselves, would have a much more negative attitude, and that after this, they would be even more negative. This is what we found. We had 4 quantitative parts in the survey. I should say this first. There was a section with information about the background of the respondents, so that we could tell who was senior and who wasn't. There was a section about experiences before the lockdown, experiences during the lockdown, a section that would uncover any changes in attitude that we'd have towards online teaching and how that might influence future teaching activities. Now, this is what we found. Many of the respondents, 42%, magical number, 42% were associate professors, 12% were full professors. So most of the respondents were actually senior people. whereas postdocs, assistant professors, and PhD students were few. Moreover, we discovered that seniority was also present as to how long people had been involved in teaching. 53% of the respondents had been teaching for more than 10 years. That's interesting. What was the change in attitude? And that's interesting because we thought that senior people would be much more negative, but no, it certainly didn't happen. 39% were somewhat more positive, 16% were much more positive towards online teaching after this. 32% were unchanged. Is that statistically significant? We did a chi-square test to find out. And even by looking at the bar charts, you can see that experience isn't really what sets people apart. The chi-square test showed that attitude and experience are independent. That's interesting. But then what is it that matters? We also tried to find out what it was that mattered. And what seems to matter, and we tested that also, is the importance of information. Here we cross-tabulated how much information people got as to how happy they were with online teaching. And it matters that if you are very unhappy with online teaching, then it's because you got less information or felt that you got less information. So that's what really sets people apart. Those who are less satisfied have felt that they were less informed. Some quotes from the qualitative survey are interesting, I think. Some people resorted to new forms of teaching that they never thought of before. One said, I started a podcast, which is a great medium for long audio, where I talk to researchers from my community and discuss either their work or topics related to the course, and he or she used live stream for Facebook. So some of these were not related to the favorite pieces of software. Some people used asynchronous media, some people used Facebook. Here's another quote that's interesting about how you actually adopt to this, because someone said, I started small, picked one thing, finished successfully, then picked another. I never gave up. I continued step by step every day, always striving to get better for the sake of my online students' learning and success. With some extra effort, with being a creative thinker, curiosity and courage, I could discover the fizz of teaching with an online classroom, and it was rewarding. My students and myself had the joy against all odds. Others were less positive, and I think when you look at the survey, you can see that everyone felt it was very demanding because it was a very rapid and it was very substantial. It was a very substantial change. And the last part of the remark, without knowing exactly how the students have perceived it, is probably a key remark here. Because the lack of contact with students was a lack of interaction was a main problem. And at Aalborg University, projects are important. Student projects account for half of our teaching. Someone here mentions that the biggest challenge was to support PBL project work with the group whose members are apart. Supervisions work fine, but the group process has been prioritized, and it's difficult to decode and solve conflicts through a screen. So student interaction suffers from all this. Early conclusions. There are changes in attitude, but they're towards a more positive opinion. Information about technological solutions is important, but student interaction suffers. There's less spontaneous interaction. And of course, we're also realizing that a state of preparedness is a necessity, not a state of individual preparedness is important for all of us. It's not something you can opt into or opt out of. But then those were the members of the teaching staff. We also asked the students. In November, we carried out a follow-up survey together with Einarsson from the business school, and we got 2,080 respondents, and we're only just beginning to analyze the results. So here's a first glimpse into that. Student and teacher interaction was something that we focused on or discovered was really important in the first survey. And the way students see it is that the interaction between teachers and students was a lot worse than before, or somewhat worse than before. So they agreed with the teaching staff on that. 78% said it was worse than before. Now for the interesting part, to follow up on Erik's remarks. What about software? Well, Microsoft Teams was used mainly for the courses. Overwhelmingly, Microsoft Teams. And for the course exams, it was Microsoft Teams most of the way. Some used Zoom, some used Skype, but mostly Microsoft Teams and Skype. That's interesting. If you ask the students about, and project supervision as well, oh, and the project meetings, yeah, Microsoft Teams all the way. If you ask the students how they feel about that, well, they say all course teaching should adopt the same technology. Anecdotally, when I speak to students online, of course, they say, oh, can't we use Microsoft Teams because that's what they're used to. Students and teachers agree, to sum up, there's less student-teacher interaction. Technology probably cannot deal with this in the short term. Maybe it never will, because being apart is different from being together. What are the alternatives? Well, a lot of people used live lecturing, but some abandoned that and used recorded presentations and adopted a flipped approach. So an alternative is to stay away from live lectures. There are other arguments for staying away from that, ones related to bandwidth, as Erik pointed out. Maybe one should have different kinds of active learning sessions, such that we do not wait for questions because the questions never come. Maybe it would be better if we ask student questions and ask them to actually say something, because spontaneous questions, they never work well even during a physical lecture. If you want everyone to stay quiet, a good strategy is to ask if there are any questions. So maybe we should try something else because it doesn't get any better in online settings. One has to really think about student-teacher interaction, and technology probably cannot solve that. But returning to the thoughts on the choice of software, it's no secret that Aalborg University is Microsoft land par excellence. We've got Microsoft Exchange Mail, we've got Microsoft Exchange Calendars, we've used Skype for Business, we don't have phones anymore, it's Skype for Business, it's Microsoft Teams, replacing Skype for Business now. Some of us had private Zoom accounts that we used for the first part of the lockdown. And then there was pressure on the management to provide Zoom accounts for everyone. So Zoom arrived eventually sometime in April. The study secretaries live in Microsoft land. They know Microsoft Teams very well, and they're not very familiar with Zoom. And if you ask them, can we use Zoom, they tend to get quite unhappy. One thing we discovered is that Discord is quite popular. We discovered that from the survey. I know that, being in computer science myself, many computer science students really like Discord and use it all the time. And what sets Discord and also Teams apart is that way you can stay connected in the background. They're not intended for well-defined meetings. And apparently that matters, especially if you're working on projects. One thing that's also important is that all the Microsoft products are well integrated. That's a nice way of saying it, that you cannot escape. But they're also overwhelming and heavy in bandwidth. I prefer Zoom, but management feels differently. Final thoughts on the choice of software. I would say that when all you have is a hammer, everything eventually looks like a nail. That's the Microsoft Teams experience. Another way of putting it is that when all you have is a spanner, everyone gets screwed in the end. And it's no different from the experience we have with buildings, really. If you've got large lecture theatres everywhere, and Aalborg University prides itself on group-based projects, but there are no group rooms, there are lots of large lecture theatres, and if you've got large lecture theatres everywhere, you have to use the lecture theatres for something, because they're there. And it's the same with Microsoft Teams. When you've got Microsoft Teams, you have to use it. So you're stuck with that model. But what we really need is, we need to not have just one solution. I think what we need is proper and dedicated, because neither Zoom nor Teams or anything were specifically meant for teaching. They had other frames of reference originally. So I think we need proper and dedicated and open software also for teaching in higher education, and open choices, so that we don't all have to stick to Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever. I know that the management loves standardization, but just as we should acknowledge that there are many good ways of teaching, we should acknowledge that there are probably many good tools that we can use. The management loves standardization, but should we as educators? And that was the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Hans. And yeah, there are not really many questions that I see. But I really liked the way that you ended the talk of saying that what we really need is more open standards instead of locking us into, you didn't really say that, of course, into Microsoft or other of those big companies. Is there any way that you can see this happen? Because as you said yourself, management likes standardization and the easy picks. You didn't say that though.
No. But anyway, I think if we were to actually get the management to be less Microsofty, then I think we would probably have to launch a local initiative. We should develop our own software together with other players. That would be an alternative, something that was directly tailored to the needs of our users, being the educators and the students.
Yeah, that's actually, sorry, that actually sounds very like a good idea, because of course this is the same problem all around the globe. And as you said, when these things were developed, it was not really focused on how can we teach online very well and reach the students and get better interaction. So yeah, and of course we are the ones that actually are best probably able to do this. Anyway, so, sorry, other question?
Could I throw in a question to you, Hans, in that sense, because, and sorry for popping in here, but one of the things that struck me through your presentation was the interactions between students and students to educators in that sense.
Yeah.
If this drags on, and no matter how much we hope for a rapid vaccination, I still think we will have to live with segregation for at least another half year, maybe more in that sense. How do you think that will impact teaching, and how do you think that would actually also force the institutions to look into different teaching methods?
I think we're forced to look into different teaching methods. I think the large lectures were never good to begin with. I mean, I even before this, I abandoned large lectures. I adopted the flipped approach, because I would rather have a conversation with students than stand there having a one-way communication. The monologue is not as interesting as the dialogue, but one has to look into different strategies, because technology will not solve that. I don't think there is an easy solution, but hopefully this is something that we can benefit from, even if and when online teaching is no longer the norm.
I think maybe
it's not a technological thing, sorry.
I think one of the things that we might see, at least in a period of time, would be hybrid solutions, and you had to prioritize the amount of people you can have physically, and then have to start thinking of less a traditional way, but thinking in, hey, maybe I do the one-on-ones and having smaller groups. And so the whole teaching framework in that sense might be quite different. And I think also talking for my global friends in that sense, in the NRN community, they say, well, the new norm for how to do online learning and online teaching is a big challenge, and one of the biggest development potentials that we will see on a global scale.
Yeah. I think the large classes, they were very much a product of management decisions aimed at being able to teach as many students as possible at the same time. And of course, in that setting, there's always a lot less interaction. In a lecture theatre with 300 students, it's almost as little interaction as during an online session. So it's probably a problem that we inherited and got even worse. Whereas I think when you look at project supervision, that's usually done in groups of, you've got groups of say 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 students, and there's a lot more interaction that way. So it's also a question of human resources.
Thank you for the answer. I will leave it to you and Ingi to finish this session.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. There are some questions now. There's talk about a question about what about hybrid lectures, where there are both physical and remote attendance for lectures. They're being offered at some universities. Yeah, what about this hybrid? I've actually seen that in action, actually 20 years ago, such a hybrid one. And it went very well. But that, in my view, actually was because the presenter was exceptionally able. And that's some of the problems that we have also been facing, being teachers and then in a classroom and then going to online. It's a completely different setup, as we know. But what do you think about this?
Well, I think lectures could always be done offline, and that way you wouldn't have the same use of bandwidth, would you? Instead of having 200 or 300 students attending an online lecture at the same time, I think one could offload that burden and have recorded presentations, and then the time spent together could be spent being actually being together. So I think as for the hybrid format, I mean, if that's the case, then we don't really need the hybrid format. If to be honest, I think it would be, I would rather have everyone be physically present or everyone be online, because sometimes no matter what you do, the other half tends to feel neglected. Yeah,
I completely concur, because it's a different environment and not an equal one. But I think this idea of recording it and then trying to make a dialogue on top of, because the students have actually seen the lecture or whatever, making it instead of, as you were saying, a dialogue instead of you just telling them. I think that might be some form of an answer. There are also more questions. Sorry about this. I hope you have time.
Yes.
What can NORDUnet do to contribute to the diversity of tools needed for more interactive design for learning? Okay, diversity of tools needed.
I think one should ask the management not to be so Microsofty, to acknowledge that there are limits. I think the reason why the management got so Microsofty and was that they were already in the habit.
Yeah, that's true.
Microsoft replaced Skype for Business by Microsoft Teams, slowly but steadily, and then we already had that as our work phone substitute, and now we could use it for everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, there's also, could we build something based on EduMeet? I haven't used that one. Maybe Erik has tried that one.
Yeah, I tried that one, and yes, to come back to what NORDUnet can actually can do. One of the things is that we actually make it possible and try to advocate a little bit for the different tools that are out there, instead also as an NORDUnet only making sure to make deals with only one company, either Microsoft or Zoom or whatever, but try to have me as, or us as NORDUnet, we could bring the diversity into the tools and try to offer more different tool sets. That is something that I think that we would like to do. Right now we just have a pandemic to deal with. So we've been quite busy, but I think it's important that we actually get this diversity into the different tools also.
Yeah.
But my issue is how do I make sure that Hans actually knows that we are offering these tools?
Yeah. Yeah. How would I know? I mean, I only came across Zoom because other people mentioned Zoom. I never used it. I struggled with stupid Skype for years. I spent the first 15 minutes of every Skype meeting complaining about connectivity or lack of connectivity.
That's something that we have never heard of within NORDUnet. Sorry.
Oh, because of poor connectivity.
Okay, there is also one here asking, do you think Microsoft Teams got the upper hand over Zoom? Well, it probably reached.
Well, I think they won the hearts and minds of students at Aalborg University.
Yeah.
Because everyone is using Microsoft Teams, and in order to do that, you would need Microsoft authentication.
Yeah, that's true. Here in Iceland, I think it's a mixed bag as well, because the ones that I know, they are being using it at the University of Iceland. They've been using a lot of Zoom, but there is also some who have been using Teams. But I think it's in a lesser extent regarding the professors. They're more using Zoom, probably because, like you, they like it better. Maybe. Yes. I haven't really asked.
I mean, one of the advantages of Microsoft Teams is that it tends to crash. So that means if a meeting is really boring, you'll be cut off at least twice.
Okay. So that's a feature.
Probably. The boring meeting feature.
Okay. Yeah, here's also one saying, others have tried to develop their own solution in other parts of the world, but eventually come back to the established players due to functionality and ongoing enhancements. Why would you succeed?
Good question. I think that we need lots of resources to do this well, but hopefully everyone can see the problems that we encountered during this. I mean, student interaction being, or lack of teacher interaction being, or even student-student interaction being two of them.
Yeah, that's true. But we all know that this will take a very dedicated effort. And as has been shown actually through this pandemic, is if we pool resources together, we can make miracles. Even the pharmaceutical companies, they have come up with a sort of a solution within nearly 8 months regarding this virus that would normally take many years to do. So when we pull together, we can make miracles in a way. Any last thoughts that you want to put in before we close the session, guys?
No, I would like to say thanks to Hans and thanks to all the work that he's actually been doing. And it was nice actually presenting all the numbers to somebody that just provides the services like we do, to see that it actually and learn a little bit about what the impacts are. Also for us to maybe include the more different tools in our toolbox for the educators, so they have the choices.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and it was interesting to seeing your numbers, Erik.
Yeah, so somebody's actually watching what you're doing.
Yeah, it was actually quite a task when the traffic changes 100 times or whatever.
Yeah.
We normally do not expect that or design things for that. Maybe 10 times, 20, 30 times, but hundreds or more than that. That's not cost effective. But okay, thank you, Erik and Hans, for your talks, and those that have been listening and watching. I hope you've all found something of interest to ponder further or even appreciate. or understand better the effort required to get us to our present reasonably good status. Thanks for listening. Take care, everyone, and best wishes for an enjoyable weekend, even if it's a Black Friday now. Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
All right.